In the world of 3D scanning, you're eventually going to come up across a high contrast subject that you're trying to capture. It can be something simple like a game controller, or who knows, anything really. Trying to get the right scanning settings can be pretty tricky because what works well on black may not work well on white. And it can be kind of frustrating because you're stuck in the battle of what do you want to sacrifice trying to get a good scan. Now, the easiest solution right out the gate, scanning spray. Make everything the same color. That 100% my recommendation. But maybe you don't have any spray, it's not always needed on every subject you're doing. What's the next best thing? Well, if you can't figure out the ideal scanning settings to capture the whole subject, scan it twice. That's what we're going to do. This David bust is, don't worry, not the original. I didn't paint him. I did a pretty quick 3D print using marble PLA, a very light color plastic, and then I painted the other side a deep black using Musso black paint, which is a very, very dark paint that also gives it a very velvety finish. But this is a worst case scenario subject. A paint that absorbs like 99% of light and a very bright, kind of glossy surface. But we are going to get around that by doing 2 scans of the same subject and combining them into one final mesh. It's fairly simple once you know the process, and it's going to help you just get around the troubles you might have with high contrast or different material properties. So let's scan. All right, I've got RivoScan fired up. My scanner is started up, hooked up and ready. Let's go ahead and scan the light side of David. I've got my exposure set to the minimum, and my line brightness is at 125, I believe, which is my general go-to for a light surface. But you're going to see it's picking up this marble PLA really well. However, we can see the black side is essentially a void. It doesn't exist as far as our scanner is concerned. Yeah, even directly on, it's not there. If I bring my exposure up, nothing. Yeah, let's bring my exposure back down. Normally, I'm not going to use a turntable when I'm doing laser scanning. I'm just doing it for this so I don't have to get up and move around while trying to record. Let's make sure we get underneath those curls. All right. Thank you, GPU Acceleration, for helping me break 3,000 frames without even realizing it. It's about twice as many as we really need, but I've got 64 gigs of RAM. Let's use it. Yeah, that's way more than we need. Let's take a look at our scan. Although I didn't really pay a lot of attention to the hair on the top of the head. You know, downside using a turntable. I'm trying to scan is getting away from me. All right, I think that's way more than enough. I'm not going for a perfect scan anyways here, although you always should. All right, so you can see here, we totally did not get any of the black half of David. We knew that was going to happen. we have the worst case scenario here in terms of the subject. That's okay. We can come in. All right, for our dark mode scan, we'll start by looking at my preview here. I like to look to see how the lines look. So if they are underexposed or my brightness is too low, you'll see here they become pretty jagged, right? I'm losing data. But if I bring my exposure up, wow, 3 on black mode. We look pretty good. So we're going to be doing our second scan in black object mode. And let's see. Yeah, exposure 3, laser brightness 255. So that's going to let us get a really good scan for black side of David. But it's actually going to hurt the light side on this scan. But that's actually okay for the purposes of what we're doing. Now, why don't we just always use high brightness and black object mode? Well, it can introduce artifacts into your scan, especially on light surfaces. Do I need to bring that exposure up another notch? I might. Holy cow. So when you have very high exposure and very high line brightness on a light subject, what's going to happen is the laser lines, as far as the depth sensors are concerned, are going to kind of, they're going to be overexposed. They're going to become thick. And that's going to introduce a lack of detail and almost to a degree of, I guess you'd call it puffiness or swelling on the actual scan subject. Let's take a look at this. Yeah, I'd say it looks good so far. Let's keep it going now. That black is really hard to pick up. Max out my exposure here. You can actually see on the bottom base there, we can't get data from how just, well, overexposed Wow, I think I have way too many frames. Once again. Well, there ain't no kill like overkill. You can actually see we didn't even get the bottom panel there in our raw scan. And you can see the differences between the black and white sides. Already, you can even see some scarring. That's to be expected. Let's finish that. All right, let's post-process this. All right, that came out pretty rough. Let's give each one of these a name. David the Light. David the Dark. Let's see what the recommended fusion is for both of these. That one wants to do 0.19. Dark one's going to come in higher, probably on 0.3. No, 0.23. You know what? I'm on the bet we could do both of these at... don't want to go down to 0.15. That would be good for showing all the flaws. Especially Harvey Dent over here, but... Sometimes I overthink things, and this is one of those moments. Let's do 1.9. Why not? All right, that fused really nice. Got a little bit of a free-floating data there. I mean, it's a reflective surface, glossy plastic, not to be, or not unexpected. Otherwise, actually, that's really nice. If we did a normal isolation on this, we would lose probably all these marker points. I don't want to do that because those are going to be useful in a moment. So I'm going to bring my isolation all the way down to 0.05 or 0.5. Yeah. And that lets them get most of the noise here. And we can always clean that up in a future step too. Let's fuse David the Dark at the same settings. All right. And, you know, I'm kind of impressed by how good that still came out on the light side, but you can definitely see the light side doesn't have the same amount of detail as that dark side. So if we actually grab our light and move it around to try and give us some more shadows and highlights where we want them, we can see here, like under the eye and just the creases up here, we don't have nearly the same amount of detail. Even the two sides of the mouth, we lose detail just from that overexposure. The software does a pretty good job cleaning that up, but yeah. And of course, I got the scar here going down the middle from the paint. That's not too bad. I'm gonna do the same isolation I did before, just get rid of a few of the points that are floating around. All right, so what we're going to want to do is get rid of this noisy, blown out side. And we're going to use our lasso tool for that. We'll switch this to orthogonal view, just personal preference, but whenever I'm doing cleanup, I switch to orthogonal, just help me keep things aligned. Let's see. I'll stay on that seam as much as I can. It's okay if we're not 100% perfect, but I want to try and keep as much of it as possible. Also, I should probably come in a little bit. Gave myself a challenge the way I painted right on the crease of the nose there. Pull this out a little bit so I can see that scar a little bit more. I'll do a bit more under there, closer to... I might be overcompensating. I'm probably going to create a small gap there, but that can be worked around. All right, that's looking pretty good. So back here on David the Light, the other thing we're going to want to do, this edge is pretty rough, right? So two options. We could do a smoothing pass. I always love to do a basic smooth at the lowest setting just to see how it impacts my model. might keep it at its original and then clean up afterwards. Yeah, because you can see we got some resin edges here, and that's common anytime you're working with a edge on a scanned surface like this, where it's trying to capture geometry, but it can't get enough data. So you can come through the lasso tool and clean that up manually, like that, or we can deal with it post-merge. But you know what? I might deal with most of this post-merge. You know, I say right before I come in and select just a couple, too fast. Select just a little bit more. All right, I'm gonna stop messing with it. And let's do a merge. Now, normally, 9 times out of 10, I'm gonna do just a regular feature alignment, but that's not gonna work. You'll see here, it's gonna try. It's gonna try its best, but yeah, we don't have any overlapping geometry. It's using that base as its determination, because that's the only thing I find that's similar enough to overlap. But we didn't delete our background data on these two scans. That background data becomes our reference for our merge. So even on the light one, it didn't scan the marker blocks, but the markers are still here. So if I grab a few of these as my reference points in from each scan, let's grab one from here. This should work. Oh, it doesn't really matter which 3 as long as you're selecting the same 3 in each model. Look at that. Got a nice merge. We have a little bit of overlap, so I'm probably going to see a little bit of a scar still, but we'll see. Let's generate that merged model. So let's look at this. Let's see. Yeah, the nose, I got a little bit of scarring still, but that at this point, that's easy to fix. We can do a normal cleanup process now. Do a quick isolation. Let's get rid of this background data, yeah? Plain select to get rid of the majority. Do a bit of a downward slope there because we do have that base. You know what? We don't really need much of David's base for this. We're experimenting. And that right there is why I love the clip tool. For that last one, just come with my lasso. All right, let's do one more isolation just in case I left any points out in space there. And what I'm going to do now is an overlap. Yeah, not a lot of overlap data on that, but what I'm going to do is another low-level smooth, and that's actually going to bring some imperfections to light here. So when you do a low-level smooth, when you have a dense point cloud, the smoothing algorithm is actually going to be looking at fewer neighboring dots in space. So the smoothing can actually, to a degree, ever so slightly sharpen in certain scenarios, and that's what it did in this one. So we can see here, I still have a little bit of a scar there, but nowhere near as bad as it was on that dark mode scan. And our light mode has preserved all the details from this side, and our dark mode scan did a really good job keeping details on that pitch black surface. So we could mesh this, it will create a scar, or we can clean it up. I don't use this tool a lot. This is the smoothing brush. It's one of those tools that when I do use it, less is more. It's going to kind of smooth and pinch these pixels together, almost like you're, I'd say, pinching Play-Doh. And less is more in the fact that I don't want to do anything that's going to impact really the actual geometry I'm wanting to keep. Yeah, see, I don't like what ditch in there. And I keep it at a very narrow diameter, and I'll come in extremely close just to minimize the area that's getting hit by it. Get one more right there. How's that hair looking? It can also, see, when you got a seam like this, it can sometimes bring points closer together. So there's a decent chance that when we mesh this, it might be able to just fill with the minimal amount of data there without running a whole fill pass. And I did not do a good job up here. We'll leave this alone because we'll probably get a nice scar there, and we can see the difference that made. But as we zoom out, yeah, you can see that nose will probably need another little cleanup pass. Actually, one of those perfect times to use manual select. Yeah, we just had some floating data there. Maybe a little bit of a hole, but I think that'll be okay. What we can do now is come back out. Let's switch this back to perspective. I have a little bit of a scar down here, I think. A little bit more cleanup to get rid of that, but let's mesh it and see what we've got. It's recommending 0.22. Let's see how that comes out. That came out great. Got an ever so slight scar on that lip there. I can clean that up a little bit, still showing on the collarbone and chest, but for getting a super hard scan subject that's very high contrast, worst case scenario, in merging two scans, that's fantastic. Would scanning spray have saved you time? Absolutely. But when you don't have spray available, there you go. We tried something new, got a really good result out of it. I'm happy with this scan. Hopefully you are too. If you found this useful, let me know. Otherwise, I hope you still enjoyed it. Get out there, scan something.